Today's guest is a life coach, NLP practitioner, and hypnotherapist from New Zealand who helps people to reconnect to themselves, to others, and the planet. He guides them with proven techniques so they can feel more energized and live their best lives. Welcome, Christopher Wesselingh. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, lovely. It's great that you made the time for this. I wanted to bring you on the show since the first time I heard you speak about receiving messages um, from Earth Mother, from Pachamama, and from nature spirits. And
Yeah.
each time I hear you talk about a message, I feel such deep resonance with it, with your words. And I just wanted to know more. And I think that it might be so beneficial for others to hear more as well. So I guess I wanted to jump in with how did that start for you? When did you start receiving messages? And like, was it after an incident, something specific an occurrence that you remember, or have you just always had that connection?
Part of me has always had a connection since childhood. I grew up in an abusive home, and it was in a country area. We lived on farmland. Behind the house, we had native bush. So I'd get out of the house wherever I could, and I'd just go play in the bush. And these are sort of back in the days when kids could disappear from the house, and we just knew we had to be back by tea time, usually when it was getting dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I had all this native bush to play in. I felt comfortable there. I felt home there. And I was aware of a sense of interaction with the trees and the plants. Like I felt I was in a family environment and I felt supported there in a way I didn't feel in my human home. Now, at the time, I wasn't really aware of what it was. I just knew I felt this way. It was as I grew up, getting to where I started an apprenticeship, and I found whenever something came up for me, as you're a young teenager or older teenager, leaving home, going into the work environment, we still have life issues. And, as teenagers, we haven't learned to be diplomatic or anything like that. So problems would arise. And I always went to the bush for comfort. I'd just disappear from where I was and go bush. It was just a place that everything always settled down. I had an accident in 1985, which left me with what was classified as severe disabilities.
Mm.
And I'd be laid up at periods for up to 3 months. And all I learned to do was go inside and explore. I explored my own mind, my own consciousness. I received input from a Buddhist monk I met in that process. He taught me how to meditate. And that sort of helped me organize what I was doing, because up until then I'd be laid up for 3 months in pain and I was just watching my breath because it hurt to breathe. And then I met the Buddhist monk who teaches me how to do it properly. Because when he taught us a breath meditation, it's like, well, I'm doing this anyway, but I wasn't doing it constructively. So he helped put that in place, gave me tools to work with it. We had metta-punya, which is loving kindness.
Mm-hmm.
We watched the breath. There's a place where we're watching the breath, then you become the breath, and then you go beyond the breath. And when you go beyond it, you're actually in the consciousness itself, which was quite an experience. Now, they don't tend to tell you this. They tend to wait till you find it naturally. So it's more of a stumbling process with gentle guidance. So I sort of like that novel approach. But what it teaches us is to self-explore, to find out what we've got, to find our own potentials, a range of abilities that we've got within ourselves. And along that path, I ended up going to some meetings in the spiritualist church where I met people with psychic abilities, because the spiritualist church works on bringing messages through from people who've already passed over. From that, I learned to communicate to other realms, other places, and things like that. And that made me conscious of a sense of communication beyond physical. And as I got into the forest, shortly after that, I was there one day and I was sitting there just resting with the trees because I just needed time out. And I got a clear impression of, why do humans do this? And it was like an image dropped into my head. And I'm going, okay. I didn't hesitate on it too long, but I answered the question. I had to look at, well, why do humans do this? And I had to answer it not to my satisfaction, but to theirs, so they could understand. They don't necessarily agree, but they can understand when they get the fullness of the information. I had to explain how humans sometimes come from an empty place and they're trying to fulfill it with material goods, possession, resources, tools, money, and they're doing it with that need to fulfill their emptiness. Mm. And, you know, the tree obviously asks, why do they feel empty? Because to the tree world, when they're in natural forest, they've got a whole sense of community. The trees, the small plants, the grasses, the molds, the mushrooms, the fungi, the dead leaves. They showed me how everything interacts with everything else and is part of a whole. And they can't work without everything in their environment that is naturally part of that whole community, which allows the tree to grow. And they couldn't understand how we as humans have this emptiness that we're trying to fulfill. And instead of connecting with our community and our environment, which is what trees do, we cut it down and destroy it, thinking money is going to fill that emptiness. You know, or I've been to places where, you know, where I found some trees one day, there was a few trees left where humans had cleared a whole lot more by a park by the river. And the trees that were left were traumatized because they couldn't understand why their brothers and sisters had been, I don't have a word for their concept of it. They could feel the trees being torn apart as a bulldozer was going through them, and they couldn't understand why anybody would do that with no use. The trees weren't returned to the ground. They can't feel any functional use of their destruction and then removal. And the ground that was left, it's like, you know, their community had been partly taken away. It was an invasion to them. So I sat and talked to them, explained to them what I felt had happened, helped them find a peace with it. They had to do some healing on the ground where the trees had been removed, healing with their memory, connecting with the trees that had passed over and helping them find their way back. And part of that is I find when a tree's going through what we call its death process, the tree spirit doesn't actually disappear. Like when us as humans die, we go to what we call the other side. But trees, I find their energy dissipates out to the small seedlings around them and becomes part of the next generation. It's like handing their knowledge, their wisdom, their energy on. And it doesn't get handed on as a whole tree because they spread it out to the seedlings. It gets reduced. So it starts with sort of like an inner knowing of some things, but not everything. So those new seedlings start their own journey.
It's so interesting that you say that. I just recently heard someone talk about it, and it was like a scientifically proven thing that they now discovered that is happening, and you got the direct exchange and the information, but science is catching up and is also learning that this is in fact exactly how it is.
It's lovely to hear. It's one thing I always enjoy when we get confirmation after we've learned it. To me, that's sharing with us and letting us know we're on track and there's an accuracy in where we're listening and how we're listening and perceiving. And one of the things I find it's interesting with trees when I'm communicating with them, we use words to communicate. So it's like words that form a sentence. But when the trees in nature, anything in nature is communicating, it drops a whole impression inside us in one go. It's like 10,000 words or 100,000 words dropped in a single instant. It's got all the tactile responses, all the impressions, all the energies of movement with it. It's just a whole concept or experience in one instant. And I've learned to do that back. So we have this interchange of whole impressions and whole experiences. Now, you can't do this from the thinking brain, which is where learning through meditation. I learned about awareness, and then I learned awareness is just like a doorway. It's a a layer. It's that first aspect of consciousness that's outside the moment, but still not pure consciousness. Awareness is that first layer that is the doorway between the world of time and the world of no time, or in the moment. And it's the doorway from time to consciousness, but it's a tool in itself. Awareness is the observer mind. So when we learn awareness, get used to it, we can then learn to direct it. We can direct it towards thoughts and thinking to understand them, where we're aware of our thoughts, but we're not caught up in the thoughts. Mm-hmm. When we turn it inwards, we're aware of the consciousness, but we're still the observer mind of the consciousness and the actions of consciousness. Once you move through that into the consciousness itself, we become that which is the consciousness, whether it's a creation, it's a potential energy, or it's the source of manifestation itself, because all of that's in consciousness. Mm-hmm. There's a knowing in consciousness. In consciousness, everything is known. When we look back at the brain side of things, the brain came in and it had a blank slate. So we're using that blank slate to write on it. Now, we either write the stories, the beliefs, and the energies we take on from the world around us, which is often from confused places and people as they're learning their own path, or we can direct it towards listening to the awareness and the messages that come through awareness and consciousness, so it learns from our deeper knowledge, the place in us that really knows. And we're not just learning the knowledge, we're learning the place within us, within our own consciousness, that has all that ability. You know, we turned thinking towards creating stories because we thought the answer was in the thinking, but it's not. It's in other aspects of consciousness that are available to us and are what we actually are. And what we're doing in the process is becoming consciously aware of ourselves and that which we are, which is both awareness, consciousness, loving compassion. And you can go to source consciousness, but that's a bit tricky because once you get in source consciousness, there is no sense of creation. The whole world of creation disappears. That pure consciousness has nothing else in it but its pureness. If it was pure consciousness and creation, it wouldn't be pure. So it separated part of itself off to do creation while the rest of it stayed in its pure state. So it sort of extended part of itself out to do what we refer to as the Big Bang, which is the point of creation. Yeah, I wouldn't say I understand the pure consciousness fully yet. It's still work in progress. But it's fun looking from that side, because when you look from there or from its point of creation, it understands everything that's happening in all space-time. And when you're learning to realize what's happening, we're used to experiencing through our five senses, sight, sound, taste, feel. In consciousness, it's got its own range of sensory perceptions, which are different to the thinking brain or the physical body's perception. And awareness, which is the middle doorway between the two, has its range of senses and perceptions, which are different to the thinking brain. So to perceive and work with a lot of this stuff, which is where our full potential lies in awareness and consciousness, not in the thinking brain. You've got to be open to, there's going to be a whole new range of senses come through, which we've got to learn to handle, manage, adapt to, learning to understand them, how to work with them, and, essentially live with them, because some of them at the start can be quite overwhelming. And part of that overwhelmed sense is often where we perceive something and the brain can't handle it, because anything that happens in the moment, like when we first touch awareness, one of the first questions I ask people, can you find an edge to it? And everybody at some point says, no, there's no edge to it. For the brain, that's impossible to take on, because the brain fixes everything. It has a concept. Every concept, every thought, every belief has a limitation. And that limitation is the description we put upon it. And when you're in awareness, you can't put a description on it because it's limitless. It's, we can call it infinite, unlimited awareness, but that's not how it feels. Those words are limited in themselves, therefore putting a constriction on them. You have to be in the space and experience it to really know what it's like, because it has a sense of potential, it has an expansiveness and an openness that the brain doesn't have, because the brain is a contractive thing, putting into concepts and ideas, whereas awareness is totally the opposite. It's expansive and open and unlimited. You can travel forever and you will still never find an edge to it, which is interesting. And once you're in consciousness, it just expands from there. It's really intriguing.
And it absolutely is. And I think you're so right. If one hasn't experienced that, it's really, really hard to kind of grasp that that concept. So yeah, this is what you do. You help people experience that. Is that true?
Yes, I don't do a lot of workshops. I work more individually. I have
Hmm.
done some workshops and I do have requests for some. Um, but I've predominantly sort of just do it one-on-one with people as people ask. Because I've been meditating for about 37 years now, a lot of the sense of want and need for me personally doesn't, it's just not there. So I don't have that need. I've got to go out and convert everybody, and sort of have what I call a born again Christian syndrome. It's like I've got the answer as we get a new bit of information that seems so unique and wonderful and new to us, and that we want to go out and convert everybody. I
Yeah, the
find I
ego
learn to sit
part.
with things first. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, you know, you think you've got to spread it everywhere.
Yes.
But the thing I find is when we get something new, if we sit with it for 4 days before talking to somebody, we don't usually feel the need to then communicate it because we know where it fits within ourselves. I find when we get something new and we want to tell everybody, what we're doing is actually scattering the energy of it around. We're
Mm.
essentially detaching and disconnecting because we're making the energy scattered externally rather than reflecting internally with it and seeing where it fits internally. When we have the internal perspective, then we've got that sense of direction from there. It comes
Hmm.
from that natural flow of where this belongs within us. And if we don't find where it belongs within us, I find it leaves an empty gap, which usually has, how would you describe it? If we have, if we go for the big one, we feel love within us. If something happens and we feel unloved, there's an emptiness and there's a space, there's a vacuum in that space that doesn't feel the love anymore. Because love is what belongs there, but something has disconnected us from it. Until we find our connection back to it, there is what I call the empty emotions or the vacuum emotions, which can be like rejection, lack of self-worth, whatever it is that comes up to occupy that space of the void, as I call it. And what we're doing is trying to find our way back to the emotions that belong in us naturally as our birthright, which have a sense of wholeness and completion with them. And
Hmm.
it's not just having it with one emotion or one experience or state of consciousness, it's having it with every emotion that belongs inside us. Love, compassion, connection. Believe it or not, even find breath as part of it, because breath is part of that connection. And realizing our breath isn't just our breath, it's a connected breath that once again is part of the circular system. Anything that functions in life, which has that life energy and life vitality with it, has a circulatory system. It's never one way. It's always constantly on the move. The breath comes in, it turns around and goes out. As it goes out, it's received by trees, they breathe it in, it turns around and comes out again. And that's just between us and trees. The ocean breathes, we're finding out now through science. The trees breathe, the earth breathes, everything breathes. We're all taking in and out the same particles of air. I'm probably breathing the breath that some dinosaur breathed a while ago. It's always there. It's always moving and touching. And that air itself actually has the consciousness of what it's touched, which is really intriguing. If you go into it, you can actually pick up on those memories. Even water knows where it's traveled. And one particle of water can actually connect with all particles of water and feel the whole experience of the whole water on this planet. The intriguing thing is when you tap into that, it's also connected to its experience before it arrived on this planet and other particles of water it knows it's out there. And what I'm describing here is the fact that everything is so consciously connected that most of us have no idea how much connection is there, how much information is there, and nothing feels separate. And when you do it from that consciously connected place, once again, consciousness isn't a series of fixed things like the brain puts things in boxes. It's a connection that makes everything available. And when everything's available, we can't experience lack.
Mhm.
We don't need to chase the dollar. We don't need to chase money. We don't need to chase materialism to try and fill those empty emotional voids. You know, especially when we listen to TV commercials that tells you, you need this. You know, you're lacking if you don't have this. No, no, there's no lack. As soon as somebody suggests that we have lack, they're out of touch with what we are as beings, as whole people. We may lose sight of it, but we never actually lose it. We've just lost sight of it, but it's still there waiting for us to find it. The same with our connection with the earth. We've never been disconnected from the earth. We breathe her air, we drink her water, we eat what is nourished by her soils. We're taking her minerals, which are part of her body, inside us, and they're part of what keeps our body alive. It's not just physical things that we're doing. There's an energy, a life energy with them. So it's not just consuming physical foods, it's consuming emotional food, it's consuming consciousness as a food. It's the consciousness of the plants we're consuming. For those who eat meat, for the animals, giving appropriate acknowledgement for that. Because everything that's involved in helping an animal or a plant grow is part of that connection we're consuming when we consume that food. And it all, like everything, imagine working for a whole day, doing the hardest work you can imagine and getting no thanks or appreciation for it. How would we feel?
Mm-hmm.
And nature is the same thing, I find. The plants and the animals, if they're received with love, compassion, and gratitude, there's a thriving goes on within them and their community when we do it that way. Once again, you can't think this stuff. If you do it in the brain, it's a thought, it's a belief, it's a disconnection. We have to do it in a connected consciousness, which is that in the moment presence with that which we're receiving and that which we're gifting on. You know, we receive the food, our body cells are changing, shifting all the time. I give thanks to Earth that receives the body cells that my body replaces on a constant basis. You know, we put dead plants and animals on one end and, you know, let's byproducts go out the other end. You know, we've got this constant flow process, which is between us and the Earth. And we often forget that, you know, there isn't a place of separation. We are so, so connected. But most of us try and figure it out from the brain. But once again, because the brain's in time, that is the first stage of disconnection from that in the moment presence, which is where both consciousness, love, and awareness exist. If you want to find them, we've got to learn to be in the moment. And it's not that hard. If we think we're in time, but a lot of people I find when they start telling me stories or trying to describe something and they're using concepts and images, I'll go, how does it feel? And once I've got them into the feelings, to actually feel something, you've got to be in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So the easiest way to transition from time to the moment is just feel. How does this feel? Where are my feelings taking? What are they showing me? What are they opening me up to? And we've got to be open to them to actually understand them. A lot of feelings I find people do what I call the swimming pool effect. They'll go up to a swimming pool, dip their toe in the water and go, I've been swimming. Whereas a lot of people do the same with their emotions. They'll go up to it, touch it, or dip one part of their senses into it and go, oh, I felt that. No, you've got to dive into it, immerse ourselves in that feeling and feel the whole living evolution of it, which is stepping into the connection and the totality of the impact of each and every emotional and sensory experience we have. You can do it with what arises in the brain, but it'll always lead you to the moment somewhere. And once you're in the moment, then you feel the living connection of it. It's an interesting little journey, but it's, yeah, how would I put it? To me, it's like a love experience.
Mm.
Yeah, you can't be in connection and not have love.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking back to something you said earlier there, about the trees, and it's still part of the connection theme
Yeah.
that you were just talking about. Um, and you mentioned that those trees that where everything was logged around them were feeling traumatized. And
Yeah.
I live in an area in the United States where there is a lot of logging. So anytime I leave my house and I drive around, I see all of the mountains here have been logged. And so I see these big, massive patches of clear cuts. And I find it painful to look at that. Like I feel the trauma within me when I see that. And so that is one of the things that I wanted to touch base on, is that the trees feel it, and I think animals feel
Yes.
it, and all of creation I think feels it, and I think we feel it. And so many of us though have that not being conscious to it happening. And I
Yes.
wonder if yeah, if do you think that is true, that humans all feel it? And what are your thoughts on that?
What I've found is what I've done the most around the area that I live in, because we live very close to native bush areas, and some of it has been developed at points, but has been allowed to go back to native bush. We've got some areas here that were never touched, so we've got virgin native bush. I take people to these places and show them how to be connected. And then we go through the process of looking at the different stages of growth of the trees, feeling how. Because when trees are growing, I'll get to your point, but we'll start at the beginning of the story. There's a spirit with the trees, and I call it a deva. And it'll be with a group of, say, 20, 25 trees. It can be more in some places, but that's a number I find around here. And as that group of trees grow up, some of those members of that group, the trees will die off. It might not have enough nutrition for one of the members, so that one will die off. For whatever reason, they'll end up dying off. But when each tree dies off in its natural group, it lets go of its physical form, but its consciousness as an energy merges into those who are left. So only the physical form is gone. And that physical form goes into the ground to nurture the rest of the group. There is no point, there is disconnection in this. And it'll get to a point where there's just one tree left. And if you've ever walked in a forest somewhere and you're walking along and you're going tree, 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 because there's that one tree that stands out, grabs you, and it's like, wow, there's something about this tree. It impacts, it feels knowledgeable, it feels wise, you can feel its presence. That's what we call a tree. It's reached individuality. And those are the ones that, if you really want to talk to something, that. Now, when you learn to communicate with them, in the communication, you can try and shut it off, but you'll never forget that you've got it, and a presence will always be there. Once you learn that sort of sense of connection, you can feel everything that happens to the tree and anything around it. It's not just, this is a surprising bit. In the world of what we humans think of trees, because we think of multiple from our separated brain, in the world of trees, there is only one tree, because they're all the tree energy. They don't see themselves as separate. So what you can feel through one tree, every tree around the planet knows that knowledge now, which is an interesting aspect of consciousness. Now, when things are done to trees, especially when there's clear felling areas, there's not other trees for, when a tree dies, even if it's the last one like that and one with individuality, it'll eventually go back to the earth, but its knowledge will go to the seedlings around it. And when it does, its knowledge and energy goes there. There's a natural flow. But when we clear fell, we're taking trees away that they would naturally transfer to. It's almost like genocide to them. There's nowhere for them to give their knowledge, to pass their energy on to. And I can only describe it as a sense of grief that I've never seen in any human experience. It's like we've not just taken them away, we've taken their home away. And the only way I can describe it is the way they feel it. It's like they haven't been given permission to exist. And to me, if you want to feel it like a genocide, that's what it feels like. It just has a sense of sacrilege for me that, yeah, not going to go there too much. It hurts.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
you know, I find if I'm going to do anything with plants, um, the thing for me is I'll talk to them if I have the opportunity 2 days beforehand, explain to them what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and I'll listen to any feedback they have on how it's appropriate to do it for them to be able to fulfill their role and transfer appropriately. And sometimes I've helped tree spirits go back to another country because we have introduced species here. Some of those are invasive, and when they're clearing some of those, I ask those spirits to go back to their country of origin and that there is natural ground in which they're welcome there. That was their origins, that's their home, that's their family. Um, and I let them know about the different families here, which is the natural timbers that we have in New Zealand, because we've got a very unique environment here. Yeah, I find what happens when you ask them 2 days beforehand, have that conversation, the plants will actually anesthetize themselves for it to happen, but they need that 2 days to do it. So when I come up to the tree, I check that it's ready, and whether it's tree or even mowing the lawn, I'll talk to the lawn 2 days beforehand. Whatever it is, if it involves nature, I communicate with it in a timely fashion so we can work together harmoniously for appropriate spirit and energy transfer or consciousness transfer to take place, so nothing's lost. Recently within that, they've taught me how to listen to the ancestors, which I had triggered by a friend in America who rang me up and says, you're not listening to the ancestors. And it hit me like a brick wall that it's like, heck, I'm not. And I was thinking just, oh yeah, ancestors of humans, but it's not. It's ancestors of everything. The trees have ancestors, the insects have ancestors. So how we treat our trees, our nature, our plant leaves traces, not just in the living generation, but in the ancestral generations that exist. And the more appropriate we make it, the more we flow with them, that they help and guide us and the life process we're in. Whereas humans, a lot of our societies are still in quite a destructive phase where we're destroying our environment, we're polluting the air, polluting the oceans, poisoning the land with substances and things. We're doing things which are away from life. If we listen to the ancestral energy, it's all about living, because in the ancestors, I find the ones that are become ancestors are the ones that have got knowledge that adds to the collective energy. If somebody hasn't done anything that is constructive that would add to the collective energy, they go through another life cycle or however many life cycles they need to add beneficial energy to the collective, which is interesting because I thought you die, you become ancestor. No, it's not always so. Plants
Yeah.
generally will become ancestors.
Yeah.
Yeah, your turn.
Yeah, it just popped up that if do you think this way we do life
Yeah,
with destruction and not no longer really having that reverence for our kin out there, um do you think that has any connection to the health of people, the health of humans?
very
Yeah.
much. Now I'm going to talk from what I call a love energy with this. There's a place in consciousness where everything that is created from love, with love, by love. And that is the one that understands the life energy as that original source of creative energy, which is unconditional love, as an aspect of consciousness, not an egoic interpretation of love, but that ultimate love that loves everything equally and all the same, from which we're all created. So even here on earth, we're created from love, with love, by love, and in love. When you feel that, you feel the life energy. The more loving we are, the more we're connected to that life energy. The more disconnected disconnected we become and separated we become, we're disconnecting ourselves from that life force that love provides. So love provides it, and we open up to it through caring, compassion, loving presence. Once again, it's experienced in the moment, not in the world of time.
Mm.
Love is in the moment experience. You cannot take love into time. You can remember love with time in the brain, but it remembers the actions, behaviors, but it does not experience love itself. When we're in love, it's like when you meet somebody new and you're in that infatuation, you're in the moment. You forget about time for a while. The power bills don't matter. That noise in the car doesn't matter until one day you wake up and they're cutting the power. I better pay attention to material things. When we get back to material world, we lose that in the moment connection. And the other person, oh, well, you're here, but why aren't I feeling that enthusiasm, that spark, that everything about you was, amazing, because the thing is, we've actually disconnected. We've gone back to the world of time.
Mm-hmm.
And in that disconnection, we don't have that flow that we have in the moment. And when you learn to stay in the moment with things, that vitality stays. Whenever you look at somebody, whenever you're with them, so long as we're in the moment, you can't help but love them. And that's something many of us forget. That love is that compassionate connection to the life force itself. And when we disconnect from it, that affects our health, that affects the energies flowing in our body. Mm-hmm. How we're disconnecting is reflective of where the disease or the condition appears. Through having disabilities and things like that, a lot of those appeared because I was disconnected in the healing process that I've been shown by nature, by the trees, by life, by different people. I haven't told anybody this before, but I've learned from some shamans, traditional healers, various nationalities and forms, and all of this about connecting back to life, to the life force. And when we do that, we're completing that connection to the life force ourselves. We've got to watch the trap. We expect other people to do that connection for us. We go to the shaman, the natural health practitioner, the dietitian. They do something for us and we do it, but we don't often own our part in that and taking responsibility for our own health. Mm. We expect somebody else to heal us. It's not up to them. They just show us the way and give us the direction. It's for us to complete the actions that cement this into place. What is this person set in motion that I have to do to make it a permanent connection? And a lot of it comes back to we've got to start letting go of perception and separation to realize how much of an illusion it is. The only place I find separation is from the moment of experience. The way I describe it, if I touch my fingertips together, the nerves send a signal here. By the time the signal's here, it's already in the past. So by the time it goes through to the brain, it's well and truly in the past. That experience of transfer of energy from the moment, the point of contact, to the brain, which can only work in the past because it takes time for every signal to be sent to the brain and then be received by the brain and then processed by the brain. The brain works in the past, not the moment. That's why we can't take the brain or thinking into the moment. We've got to realize that sits over there in time. Now I'm in the moment. I have to use the senses of the moment and the perceptions of the moment, of both awareness, of consciousness, and that unconditional love that sits right on the doorstep of pure consciousness. So when pure consciousness manifested, it created that unconditional love through which everything else was created, which is why we feel love in everything and with everything when we're in a state of connection. You can't feel any other way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting little mix.
Mm-hmm. It also means, if I understand it all correctly, also means like really truly feeling absolutely everything, right? It's all part of it. That we, like you said earlier, to really full-heartedly feel everything.
Yes.
It's so part of it, and we're so conditioned to try and shy away from it. Like you said earlier, people dip their toe because it hurts, because certain emotions are not seen as like desirable emotions, right? And so we try to walk
Yes,
around them, and it does cut off the life energy and the life force and the ability to really fully be. And yeah, it takes away a lot.
totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does so much. Um, if I give the full-on version here, which might be a bit of a stretch for some of us who are listening, but we'll see. When we're in that connection, we literally do feel everything that's happening, or we know we've got the ability. It's just learning to open up to it. Part of the opening up process is we'll often have a fear of the unknown, and that'll stop people. So they'll stay within what they feel they can recognize, and they'll try and reach out to it to experience it. You can't. You've got to go into the experience. But what I've learned over time is I'll sit with an experience that's new, and I'll sit with it for days, weeks. Yes, I'll do the usual life things like, preparing meals, making sure I'm fed, taken care of, and that. Um, but the rest of the time I have available, I'll just sit with that emotion or that experience until I get to know it. I'm not trying to interpret it, which is what the brain does. The brain receives signals. It tries to interpret it and add story, and that's a whole story in itself. But sitting in the presence of this new experience until the experience makes sense through our experience of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we watch how it behaves, how it moves, what it does, because when it's so new, there's nothing in us that has recognition of it. So we start to recognize the repetition of certain parts of behavior with it, of certain connections that happen within ourselves, what it opens us up to, and it's having the patience to do it. When we fear the unknown, there's a presumption that we're not going to be able to do anything with it, or it's going to have control over us or power over us. It's not about that. That's only the ego that perceives power. Real power in the connected world is just full flowing life energy. When we're in full flow with the life energy, we become fully conscious of that life and that flow. And nothing has, you can't have power over it because it's all connected. It's all one. That's the only way it flows.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, power there is perceived as life energy. We're either opened up to it or close to it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, going into connected conscience to answer part of that, yes, we do get to a place where we feel everything everywhere. Now, most people think, oh, yeah, around the planet. But no, between awareness and what I call the layer of love, which is that creative energy through which all form manifests, it's what's referred to as gnosis, or the inner knowing. When you get into that inner knowing, we know everything everywhere in all space time. Literally, we know everything that's happening in every planet, every galaxy, and all the spaces in between. We know every race, we know every insect, molecule, you name it. We know the consciousness that's directing it. We know what that's about, what role everything is playing. And when we're in this space, one thing I find is nothing is wasted. Everything is seen as absolutely equal, equally important, equally loved, appreciated, and equally valued. And it all has purpose, every single thing, nothing left out.
Mm-hmm.
And in that wholeness of seeing everything working together, you can feel how nothing needs to be added and nothing needs to be taken away. It's just consciousness awakening to itself through this process of interaction, which is, once again, we see within ourselves, the brain, which was asleep, is waking up to what we are.
Mm-hmm.
The brain, it's a funny way it does it, because the brain has got very limited perception. I remember listening to a TED talk. I can't remember the name of the gentleman who was doing it. He says, our sensory perception in human form, we only receive about 1/trillionth of the information available. Our senses are very, very limited. But once you go into awareness and then consciousness, whole new worlds open up through those different aspects of sensory perception that are
Mm-hmm.
available through awareness and then conscious, and that layer of love, which has its own range of senses. And those ones, I can't help but say, they're the yummiest. If you want to get into love, that creative energy through which all is created, you want yummy, that's where Believe me, it rocks it.
I am
Yeah.
sure it does. Well, as we're wrapping up here, one tip on how to get started on that journey, on how to get there. Is there
The,
one thing you can
the
share?
one, yeah, the one thing I always ask people, are you breathing?
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask them, and they'll start telling me, oh, yeah, I'm breathing because I'm alive. And I go, that's a theory. I question them until they go, because I feel it. I says, how does that feel? That drop, once they get into those feelings, I've got them dropping into it, drops them into the moment. And then you can start exploring the moment from there. The other one, which is an easy one, I ask people if they're thinking. I say, put the thoughts on this hand. And then I say, do you notice there's awareness here that's aware of those thoughts? And they'll go yes at some point. Now I said, drop the thoughts away. How does the awareness feel that was aware of those thoughts, but is now just present within itself? And then they'll start exploring that awareness. It's a quick and easy way to get into it, but it takes time to explore it and get used to it. We learn to direct it. In meditation, I direct awareness through being aware of the breath in the top of the lungs, middle of the lungs, bottom of the lungs, front of the lungs, back of them, at the beginning of the breath, middle of the breath, turn of the breath. There's exercises where we practice directing awareness. And then when we go into awareness itself and consciousness fully, we've got that sense of being able to direct that awareness, drop the awareness away. It just naturally falls away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, as I say before, we become the experience. So not only can we be aware of everything happening on every planet and every galaxy, you can literally experience it in all the same space-time. Learning to handle that is the interesting bit, because you can't do it. The brain cannot grasp this. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot go there with the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the two tricks: breath, being aware of our thoughts, dropping thoughts out, being with the awareness, and investigating that space as we do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Thank you. And it's so true. From my own experience, I know this, like I'm trying to follow along here, and I've noticed my brain kind of just like reaching the reaching the points of and when I'm in meditation or when I'm really truly present in the moment, I have a sense of what you are describing here, right? And it makes sense from that aspect. But when I'm trying to process and listen and trying to make another point or move the conversation along, it doesn't quite function in that way. So
Yeah,
yeah, thank you. It makes complete sense.
perfect. Yeah, I
Yeah.
often watch people scramble their brains with it.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. Well, as we're wrapping up, any final comments that you would like to share? Anything that you wish I had asked and didn't, and you would like to speak to?
Not that comes to mind immediately. I think we've covered a lot. If you want to develop connection, just learn to find an environment that you feel comfortable with and just stand there and explore the senses that arise in the moment of experience. The more we practice it, the more it becomes part of us and who we are. And once again, in that experience, not getting caught up in the thoughts, but just the awareness of the current sensation arising. And just learn to explore it, feel its totality. Because what we're doing is exploring our own sensory range. And whatever it arises for us, I won't tell you what to expect because every experience is individual. But if anybody has questions, they're welcome to contact either you, Tanya, or myself, and inquire from there. There's good people around who are able to help.
Mm.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher, for being here today and for sharing your wisdom.